All right, so I'll just describe a little bit more stuff the way that I was when I was a leftist communist, and then when I was a right winger. So, like I said, my whole life I was leftist communist, anti-white. Then about 2014, I became a right winger nationalist, pro-white. Then I became in like 2016 a communist, or no. And then I became like in 2015 a communist again, anti-white. And then like in 2016 I became a right winger again, pro-white. So I'll describe a little bit of what I was like when I was a communist. And like I said, I'll talk a little bit about some of my interactions with my friend Noah. So Noah, like I remember Noah was kind of like anti-rich. So Noah would be like, yes, there's studies that, rich people, are actually more psychopathic and they're actually more, less compassionate and stuff like that. So he'd be looking down upon the rich. And I asked my grandpa what he thought about this. And my grandpa would be like, well, that seems to be, expression of superior inferior software, to think that like the poor are superior just because they're poor. And that's like, and that's dualistic software, because you're like, oh, I'm poor and I must be superior because I'm poor and therefore I'm going to go to heaven. And I remember I asked my grandpa, and this is what was leaning me more toward like the right wing was, I was like, well, Jesus said, blessed are the poor and stuff, right? And my grandpa was like, well, he says that in one of the gospels, it's translated, blessed are the poor, but in the other gospel, it's the same speech as blessed are the poor in spirit. So my grandpa was like, he's not talking about the poor. He's not talking, but when I was a leftist, communist, anti-white, I wanted to be like, yeah, the poor are good. The people of color are good. The people in South America and Africa, let them come over the borders and don't be mean. Insider, outsider software, superior, inferior software. I tried to utilize my grandpa's teachings with my own ego agendas, right? The spiritual teachings. So like in a communist way. So like, yeah, no spiritual, no insider, outsider software. That's dualistic. That's self-confirmatory. No, let them in. But really, I wanted to destroy the white people, because I saw myself as Jewish and I saw the white people as bad as a leftist, right? And as the biggest threat to the Jews. Like, you don't see people of color as a threat. Like, you're just like, whatever. But you see white people as a threat. So, that's the way I was. And I was just like, yeah, but I asked my grandpa, like, Noah seemed to be, he was more of a leftist communist. And we both liked each other in college a lot because we were both communists, and kind of anti-white. Although I think Noah was less anti-white than me. Maybe Noah even had higher conscience than I did. I was very anti-white, very communist. But, Noah was a little bit of an anomaly. Like, maybe he even was a little bit right-wing at sometimes. I don't know. But maybe he had transpersonal consciousness a little bit. But it did seem to me that he was anti-white communist. And he wanted race mixing. It was for race mixing, it seemed to me. So just like, Noah would describe that he would be more attracted to women of color and stuff, and not really white people. And we would both be like against gentrification, and we would both be like, but at the same time, like Noah was like, they shouldn't say mean things about Trump. They shouldn't say that Trump has a mental illness, because Noah's very much against the idea of mental illnesses. And I remember, this is another thing that my grandpa would talk about. My grandpa would be like, it's best not to label people. So I gotta be like, everything is one, everything is energy. And he'd be like, when you label somebody, then you kind of constrict your consciousness, and you kind of reduce him, and you're not able to see what he really is because you've applied a label. So calling someone schizophrenic or bipolar, that could prevent you from seeing what he truly is, as a wave in the ocean, and what he really is, the deep down, or like what he really is, and you're just seeing the facade, you're just seeing the software. But my grandpa would be like, it's best not to label. So even labeling someone black, or labeling someone white, and labeling someone a woman, or labeling someone a man. So this is the kind of stuff that made me think, well, maybe my grandpa's a little bit of a leftist, because a leftist would be like, yeah, don't label. Because I wanted, when I was a leftist and I wanted race mixing, I'd be like, yeah, gender's a social construction, race is a social construction. Because I wanted to be like, yeah, black people can do the same thing as white people. It's just because of, it's just because the white man puts the black man down, and because of Pygmalion effect and stereotype bias, and everybody should mix. And I wanted the white people and black people to mix, because I wanted the white people to be destroyed so I could defeat the white people, because I saw myself as Jewish, right? And that's really the way I saw it. So, but I tried to mask it under like, yeah, I just am open-minded, and I can recognize that we're all one, and blah, blah, blah. But really it was just spiritual babble. I was just misutilizing my grandpa's teachings, right? But my grandpa, another thing that he would say is, So yeah, he would be. So I was like, yeah, the poor, the poor are better. That's what I wanted to believe when I was a communist. But then my grandpa's like, no, that's superior, inferior software. I had an agenda, and my grandpa's right. I had an agenda. I saw myself as Jewish, and I wanted to defeat the white people, and I wanted to, be like, no, it's like there's been studies that, people with nicer cars, they don't wait at stop signs long enough. So this proves that they're less compassionate and, they're really just psychopaths. And usually the rich people just get there because they're more psychopathic and less agreeable. And, the world's not fair. And, and maybe because Noah's a little bit Jewish and Noah wanted to be on the side of the victims like I did. I was always against victim blamers. And like Noah was against the idea like, people say like, if someone's rich, it's because they worked hard and because, and no matter what, they would always get there because they have like superior qualities and stuff like that. And Noah was like against that idea. Now, my grandpa was kind of like that, but in terms of this, my grandpa would be, what he taught me much later, but it took me a long time to figure this out. My grandpa would be like, yes, well, all that matters is how hard you work. And, just going all out and being like Forrest Gump and just running and going all out and then getting in the flow and, stuff like that. But again, like when my grandpa talked about hard work and just going all out, I'd be like, yeah, he's just a right-winger white supremacist. Because in my mind, it's like, no, it's not all about, don't take responsibility for everything. It's not all about how hard you work and stuff like that. A lot of it's privilege, a lot of it's stuff like that. And even my grandpa would admit, if you're in the flow, you can discern stuff like that. You can discern if people have superior or expressing superior, inferior software and keeping quote unquote black people down and stuff like that. But regardless, I was a leftist and I wanted race mixing, right? And I wanted to defeat the white people and make them mix. So anyways, I just, that's the way I was at that time. But then I started becoming more right wing because my grandpa was starting to help me to recognize, okay, well, Jesus wasn't necessarily for the poor. And like, I wanted to be like, yeah, the meek shall inherit the earth. The grandpa, doesn't that mean that the meek, the poor people, I want to think the people of color, the people who are downtrodden, they're the good ones, the victims are the best. But, my grandpa would be like, that's not meekness because that's like, my grandpa it's like what Nietzsche says. And my grandpa's an existential metapsychiatrist and Nietzsche's an existentialist, and ideas, some people think, oh, just because I'm inferior, I'm superior. But they're still focused on the self and they still have a sense of superiority. And that's not true meekness, my grandpa would say. So my grandpa would be like, no, meekness is transcendence of the self and the flow. And there's no formula for the flow. You can help. There's rituals that can help you get into it, like going all out, running like Forrest Gump and stuff like that. But there's no formula for the flow. And, if you think you're meek, and you're trying to be meek and stuff, you're not really meek. That's just a facade. It's still self-confirmatory. You're still stuck in the self. You're not really in the flow. You're just trying to belong. You're just trying to fit in. You're just trying to be superior. You're still focused on the self. You haven't transcended the self. So, my grandpa was moving me more toward right wing. And I was moving away from that leftist mode of being, the anti-white leftist mode of being that I had before, everybody mixed. And then another thing that happened was I went to a Chabad place and I talked about the Tower of Babel thing, and my grandpa saying like, I asked my grandpa what he thinks. My grandpa's like, yeah, not everybody's equal. That's true. And there was other things I read in there that led me to that. Like, I think that one of the things I also read in that to my grandpa was there was a story about the Babylonians, like they would set up idols, but they would put the Tetragrammaton's name on the idols. And then the idols would be able to speak. And I asked my grandpa, what do you think that means? And my grandpa was like, the idea that the Zohar was saying was that, yes, they could speak because the Tetragrammaton could give them power, even though they're idols. But my grandpa's like, well, the idols, the attempts that the Babylonian Empire did was to bring everybody together, to create an empire and to mix everybody, bring everybody together. And that's a desire for oneness. But and a desire for the flow. But my grandpa was like, but you can't force the flow. You can't force oneness. And if you force it, it's not the flow. So you can't and that's the idea. You have to upgrade your software and you have to be in mutual participation. And I wasn't. I was a leftist and I saw myself as Jewish and I wanted to mix people. So I wasn't, I seemed like I thought I was in the flow. I was like, hey, I'm transcending myself. The borders should be gone. And we should, you should let the prisoners go because, you should be in the flow. But why did I want to let the prisoners go? Because I saw prisoners as more people of color and I wanted the people of color to mix. So I'm like, yeah, let the prisoners go. Mix with the white people and destroy the white people. So I'm like, yeah, let the prisoners go. And because, because that was another thing my grandpa kind of taught. My grandpa was like, yeah, it is true that, if you're in the flow, you wouldn't want to do capital punishment because, you don't want to kill anybody. That could be predator prey software. But then at the same time, my grandpa would be like, but there is no formula for the flow. But when I was a leftist, I wanted to be like, yeah, my grandpa's right. There, you should, you shouldn't have capital punishment, and you should let prisoners go, and you should be loving to them. And if you're loving to them and let them go, and, then it'll be better. And it's really just society's fault that their black people are in jail, and the Mexicans are in jail and stuff. And it's just because of racism. But then my grandpa's like, but then when I became a right winger, I was more like, yeah, but there is no formula. Like, I tried to use my grandpa's, there is no formula though. Sometimes it's the best, because I wanted to keep the black people in the prison, and I didn't want racial mixing, and I didn't want to destroy the white race. So I kind of switched from being a leftist to being a right winger. But again, my grandpa would say, later I would know, my grandpa would say, there is no formula in the flow. In the flow, you can discern what is most appropriate. But regardless, I moved from being a left winger, and I went back to being more of a right winger in like 2016. And just, what are some other examples? So that's kind of the shift that I underwent. And yeah, so I started seeing people of, I stopped seeing, the people of color is just bad because of the white man putting them down and stuff. And I started questioning, maybe there is biological aspects to it and stuff. And then I'll get to how my grandpa started confusing me more later. And I'll get to the book that I wrote. I'll get to the book that I wrote when I was a leftist, or no, when I became a right winger again, my Based on True Story book, when I became a right winger. Actually, I'll talk about it right now. So at that time, like I said, my grandpa wasn't teaching me, because we got in an argument, and because my grandpa was like, if you're in the flow, then you're not attached to anything. So like, don't be attached to your mom and dad. And I felt like he was trying to force me out of my mom and dad. And I wanted help from my mom and dad, and I wanted to see them and stuff. And I thought that they were misinterpreting. I thought that he was casting pearls of swine. And they're like, yeah, don't be attached to us, get away from us. And I hadn't talked to my mom and dad for years. I hadn't seen them for years, since 2013, like 2012, I saw them like one time. I wanted to see them. But my grandpa was like, yeah, I felt like his spiritual stuff was just a way to put me down and to keep me, separate from them. And like I said, I don't think that he had respect for me, because he didn't believe the quadrant model. I think he thought I was crazy, a little bit. So, and he was confusing me. So, but then he's trying to teach me this stuff like, yeah, it's best to take responsibility for everything, and just take responsibility for your software. And he's like, what was your software? What's the problems with your software that's led to the problems in your life? So I'm trying to blame myself. So like, I became a right winger, so I'm trying to blame myself. And like, before, when I was a left winger, I was always against blaming the victim. But then, because I was like, that's what the right wingers do, and they're not compassionate, and they just blame the victim. But then I'm starting to try to look into myself, like, what is my software? What is my software problems? But I wasn't able to admit that I was anti-white, and that my whole life I saw myself as Jewish, and I was anti-white and stuff, because I didn't want to admit that to the world. So I wrote my Based on True Story book, and I was trying to, because I wanted my grandpa to teach me again, because I still wanted to learn more, and I was confused at this point. I still didn't understand what the flow was, and I was still confused. So I tried to write this Based on True Story book to give to my grandpa, and also tell everybody, and try to, first off, I wanted to tell people my whole story, and I wanted to get a deeper understanding, and I wanted my grandpa to start teaching me again. So in this book, I'm saying like, yes, yeah, it might have been I had software problems. I believed in Darwinism, and which is true. I did believe in Darwinism when I was a leftist, and I wanted to destroy religion. But I didn't want to admit that I was leftist, and I was anti-white my whole life, and I wanted race mixing. And I couldn't admit that, because I didn't want people to know that. So I was like, so I wrote my Based on True Story book, and I was like, yes, I was a Darwinist, and I think that that's the reason why I was a right winger, which isn't true. When I was a Darwinist, I was anti-religion, and I was not a right winger. I wanted race mixing and stuff. So I was like, yes, I was a Darwinist, and I think that that's what led me to being a right-winger extremist in 2014, which wasn't true. When I became a right-winger extremist, it wasn't because I was a Darwinist. When I became a right-winger extremist, it was when I became more religious, and I liked religion because it divided people, and I started to like Christianity more and religion more because it divided people, and it, I thought it was good for the white race. It was better for the white race. And also, like, I started to think, like, maybe there is a heaven and a hell, and maybe black people and people of color and stuff and Jews are more sinful and stuff, and more impulsive, and maybe lower levels of software, quote unquote. And maybe it is best that they're separate from the white people, because it'll stop the white people from going to hell and stuff. And, I became more religious. But at the time, I didn't really have that insight to understand that. So I was like, well, maybe it was because I believed in Darwinism, and that's why I became a right winger. And no, when I believed in Darwinism, I wanted to destroy religion and encourage race mixing and destroy the white people and stuff. But so so I wrote this book because I was trying to blame myself. And I thought this was what my grandpa was teaching, because he's like, it's best to take responsibility for everything, because, all you can do is you can't change other people. And again, I thought that was a stupid right-wing concept. Like, you can't change other people. And I thought that that's what really hurt me in the case of my parents, because my grandpa's like, yeah, you can't change your parents, Ryan. All you can do is change yourself. You just upgrade your software. And my parents are like, yeah, you can't change us, Ryan. Just upgrade. You can only change yourself. You can't change us. My grandpa would be like, no, you can't change yourself. You want to transcend the self. But, you can't change us. So we're not even going to listen to you, and we're just going to dismiss you. And you can't change us. You have to just accept that. And I feel like my grandpa influenced them to be like that. When I thought, when I was a leftist, when I was a Marxist, I was like, no, you can change people. You can influence people, and you can influence. It is true. You can influence my parents to talk to me and stuff like that. But my grandpa's like, no, you can't change people. They have to ask the questions first. And I felt like that was bullshit. But but I became a right winger again, and I was like, yeah, okay, so I have to take responsibility. Maybe it's my fault. So I'm like, okay, what was it? Maybe it was my software. Maybe because when I believed in Darwinism, I had superior, inferior software, as opposed to seeing everything as one. And I was like, yeah, maybe that's the reason. And, my grandpa, he's right. And he has, transcendental flow consciousness, and he has oneness mutual participation consciousness. But, maybe I wanted to be a sperm donor my whole life. And maybe it's, I just wanted to be superior. And maybe that's why I wanted my basketball DVDs. It was superior, inferior software. Really, I think the reason why I wanted my basketball DVDs was I want to know the truth. I'm a 5W4 on the Enneagram. I want to know. And I want to study the flow. And I really was considered by many the best player in the country. And I was doing things I was unconscious of. And I want to see what it was. And I can duplicate it. And and also I want to study the swag flow, which I'm not going to get into, because I had lost the swag flow, but I'm not going to get into that right now. But anyways, I was, but in this time when I became a right winger again, so I'm trying to blame myself. Instead of, I was always, when I was a left winger, I was always against blaming the victim. But now that I became a right winger, I was trying to blame myself. So I'm like, yeah, maybe it was my software. Because my grandpa's always like, yeah, you just have to, take responsibility and take responsibility for upgrading your software. So you have to analyze what was your software that led to the problems and stuff. So I'm trying to I don't think it was much of this. I think it was mainly, maybe I had some software issues and stuff. But I think if it wasn't for the shoot away machine, none of the problems would have happened. I was still in the flow. I was doing great. The shoe machine messed things up, and I needed help to fix it, and it just messed things up. But my grandpa would be like, well, you can't change anything. All you can do is upgrade your software. Well, I don't know if that's really helpful. It's not always helpful. And again, my grandpa, I think, might admit, if you're in the flow, you can discern when that's not helpful. And I think that he wasn't helpful. And I think he made me even more crazy. And this whole, me trying to blame myself and take responsibility, I think that hurt me even more. It made me more crazy. When I think I just needed some compassion, and it was just a shoot away machine. If it wasn't for that, and I needed, my parents to talk to me, and and my grandpa could have helped me get insight into the fact that I was anti-white and, that type of stuff, but he didn't have the insight. And I think that they didn't help me at all. And it would have been a lot better. They could have done a lot better, but, I can have positive, optimistic point of view and be like, well, maybe it was all for the best. Maybe I wasn't ready at that time, and I'm growing, and maybe I wasn't ready at that time, and I had to learn all this stuff that I learned now, and I had to go through what I had to go through. But regardless, who knows? But all I have to say is, at the time I became a right winger, so I'm blaming myself, and I'm trying to take responsibility, which is blaming yourself. But my grandpa would be like, it's not blaming yourself, because there is no self. It's take responsibility for your software, which you can upgrade. You are not your software. You can upgrade your software. So I'm like, okay, well, maybe I had superior, inferior software, and inside, and that when I believed in Darwinism, I became a right winger because I believed that the white people were superior. So I had superior, inferior software, and I tried to make it very simplistic and tried to make my grandpa happy. And my grandpa read it, and he's like, "This is very good, Ryan. You're taking responsibility for your software." And so he started teaching me again. So he stopped teaching me for a while because we got in a fight. But then I'm like, okay, I'll take responsibility for my software, and he started teaching me again. So I'll get into that. And like I said, he was making me into more of a right winger because I was studying the Chabad stuff with him, and I'll just get into more of when I became a right winger and kind of the stuff that he was teaching me and the ideas that I was coming up with when I became a right winger again. And like I said, I became a right winger again in 2016. I became a right winger pro-white nationalist, but then in 2020, I went back to being a left wing communist anti-white person. So I'll get into that.